This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of Righteous, Zen and the Ephemeral, and American Barbarian. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and you're listening to two guys with advanced degrees talking about webcomics.
That's right. And on this month's webcomics episode, Sean and I are going to talk about two current ongoing and one completed webcomic. We're going to begin with Righteous, written by Kevin Scheller, with art by Joseba Morales and Gab Contreras. After that, we're going to look at Laurence Dionne's Zen and the Ephemeral. And we're going to wrap up with a completed webcomic by Tom Scioli, American Barbarian. But before we get to those webcomics, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts can be from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some mind-blowing specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Many times at 50% off cover price. But every now and again, you can find discounts that are even more impressive than that.
And since we are talking about webcomics here, we have to point out that you might not prefer the printed version of comics, so you might be more interested in looking stuff electronically. Well, they've got a sister company, mydigitalcomics.com, which offers electronic comics in digital format you can take a look at. They have a lot of the best publishers out there. They got Image, Action Labs, Top Cow, tons of other folks out there, and most of their comics are available in PDF and CBZ formats, which are DRM free, which is a great benefit. And I can't go off on why that's such an awesome thing, but just know that that's the way to go. So if you prefer electronic versions of all your favorite comics, check out mydigitalcomics.com.
That's right. You can't go wrong with the good people at Discount Comic Book Service if you like your comics in hard copy form or digital. That's dcbservice.com and mydigitalcomics.com. Go there for all of your comics, pre-ordering, and digital needs. And after you do get your books there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Sean and Derek sent you. So, Sean, before we get into a discussion of the three webcomics for this month, we should mention that we haven't been around for a while. And, I mentioned this on this last weekly regular episode that Gene and I did. But, this has been my fault because recently I have moved from Texas to North Carolina because of the family situation. My dad is in bad shape, and so the move and dealing with my father has taken a lot of time. And unfortunately, it took me away from the podcast, not only the regular review show, but also the various monthly shows. And so, last time you and I did a webcomics episode was back in July. So it's been a little while.
Yeah, it has been a minute. But, it's one of the things that we do bring up on this show fairly, I wouldn't say every episode, but fairly regularly, in that, these a lot of the webcomics that we're looking at are on irregular schedules for exactly the same types of reasons.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly something that we try to keep in mind, is that for the most of the people who are doing these webcomics, this is not their full-time job. And so, life gets in the way. You have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of your own things first before you can work on your webcomic. And I think the same applies here. So I'm hoping none of our listeners hold it against you for taking care of family business before the podcast.
Yeah. It was unfortunate that I had to take some time away, but we're back now, and we're not going anywhere. For those who have been longing for the monthly webcomics episode, here we are. We're back. Enjoy. Okay, Sean, let's begin with the first webcomic that we're going to be looking at, and that is Righteous. This is written by Kevin Scheller, and pencils, inks, and lettering by Joseba Morales. And then Gab Contreras does the colors. I don't know where to begin with this one. I guess we should start with the premise. So if you were going to describe this to the uninitiated, how would you do so?
Well, the sales, essentially the sales pitch that I heard originally, and what intrigued me about it is that's what if everybody on the planet suddenly woke up and wanted to do the right thing, right? And just be, good people and helping others and making sure everybody else on the planet is in as good a shape as they possibly can be. Mm-hmm. What if everybody wanted to do that? Not just that one good Samaritan here and there. But what if everybody said, you know what, making money maybe isn't the end-all be-all goal. Maybe it's making people happy. Maybe it's making life better for everybody. And so that's basically the story here, is what that might look like.
Yeah, I think that's that's a good premise, a way to begin describing what's going on here in this webcomic. And we should mention that the web address for this is Righteous Comic. That's one word, righteouscomic.smackjeeves, SMACKJEEVES.com. So that's righteouscomic.smackjeeves.com. And that's where you can find this webcomic. It started on November 3rd, 2016. And it's currently running, I think we're several pages into chapter 4. And as we record this, the last installment was on October 5th. So just a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned what would happen if many people just started to do the right thing. How would the world change? And I think that's what is described in chapter 0. Which is, I don't know, something like about 5 or 6 pages long. So it's not long at all. And what you have is a series of scenarios that begins with, I guess, a descriptive passage. What would happen if everybody suddenly woke up, committed to doing the right thing? And so you get a series of situations where people are all of a sudden wanting to do the right thing. So, for instance, it begins on the first page with a fictitious news organization, TBC News, and I guess the manager says, tonight our lead story is how TBC News has been lying to the public for years. And then everybody's saying, yeah. And he says, for the last 42 years, our reports have been crafted to deliver propaganda from our corporate ownership. And so they're trying to do the right thing. And then on that next page, you get someone who is, I guess, the CEO of a company called Big Mart, who says, what would it take to feed the hungry yearly? I want numbers. And he's talking to his secretary about this. And so he's talking about, trying to end world hunger. And then we turn to the third page and we get this actress who is wanting to help people by refusing to endorse any products that is made by sweatshop labor. And then we get to the fourth page, and again, we have the same setup. What would happen if everybody suddenly woke up, committed to doing the right thing? And we have Klansmen who walk into, it looks like a church. I don't know if it is a church, but it's some kind of hall. And then the Grand Dragon says, yesterday I believed wholeheartedly in the supremacy of the white man. Today I find it impossible to even recognize who I was. How could I have believed in such absurdity, or in the Klan and what it represents? Therefore, I must stand down as your grand dragon. And then you see him burning their white robes. And so that's how it begins, those first 4 pages in Chapter 0. Now, I mention this because in Chapter 0, we get a lot of different people who are wanting to do the right thing. But in the story proper, where we are dealing with the main protagonist is a guy named Daniel and a woman he works with, Jen. There are not that many people who are wanting to do the right thing, who aren't, how should we call it, touched. And so, as the story progresses, there are more and more people who are, so to speak, touched and wanting to do the right thing. For instance, Daniel's boss or former boss after he gets fired, Chuck. But not that many people are wanting to do the right thing. And so it's a little different from Chapter 0 once you get into Chapter 2 through 4. Did you sense that as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's very much, he treats it almost as if this doing good thing is a virus or a disease or of some kind, almost, in that it gets there's like a physical transmission of person to person, and it starts with one guy, and then as he does a good deed for someone else, that person kind of catches that same virus, and then they start doing that as well, and so it starts spreading almost exponentially. Not that we're still early enough on in the book that there aren't that many people involved yet. But it's one of those, it's almost like a viral kind of reaction on things, where at least so far no one seems particularly immune, so that it just happens to start with one guy and it's spreading from person to person as we go forward. And I think that he's using that as a means, I think, to ground it at least somewhat. It's not, here's what the world would look like. It's, here's how the world would change, kind of thing. Right. And so the story we're seeing is, what if, one person did do the right thing? And I think I've actually seen like TV commercials that follow along those same lines, where one person does a good thing, somebody else sees that and says, "Oh, you know what? I should be a good person too." That kid helped the old woman across the street.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. It's kind of like paying it forward.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of what we see happening in the book. That Chapter 0, like you mentioned, is, I think, 6 months down the road or a year down the road or something to that effect, after a large number of people have been, for lack of a better term, affected. Or infected. I don't know exactly how this is happening here, but yeah, the start of it is, regular, Daniel's a power broker in corporate offices, and very dismissive of the homeless guy in the car park area, and just any old corporate lawyer type running through corporate America, basically. And it's only slowly does this start to build and catch from person to person to person.
That's right, yeah, because Daniel works as a actuarial.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that. And basically, what he does is he weighs the costs of whether a company should make some changes against any potential liability. And basically what he's doing is he is calculating on people's misery. And that starts to get to him after he is, again, so to speak, touched. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned this in terms of a virus, because how Daniel changes. Because you're right, we see him at the very beginning. He seems to be a little callous. He's very good at his job. He doesn't seem to care about the cost of human life, because his company is hired by this really big automobile manufacturer, and they want to know if they make certain changes, what this could cost, not so much in terms of human lives, but in terms of lawsuits, right? And so is it worth it or not? he's not bothered by that until one night in bed. And when we see him before this evening when he's touched, because he sees this homeless guy. His name is Greg, although he doesn't know it at the time, and know his name at the time. And he's callous. He doesn't, he says, hey, go get a job. And then that evening he's in bed and he wakes up to this mysterious figure that seems to be made of light. And in fact, this figure is on the cover of the first chapter. And by the way, the chapters are structured like individual issues of comic books. And so this light entity, whatever we want to call it, touches him, and then is when he changes. And then is when he starts feeling guilty about the kind of work that he does. He feels impelled to not only help that homeless guy, Greg, but anyone. And in fact, he ends up eventually losing his job because he can't do his work because he finds it repulsive, betting against, so to speak, individual human lives. But also he spends a lot of time helping other people, and he feels like driven to do that. So we know why or how he is turned or changed because he's touched by this light entity. But it's not entirely clear how his coworker Jen or his boss or former boss later on, Chuck, are infected. I mean, Chuck seems to be infected once Daniel gives him a kind of a prize baseball, right? That he has in his office. Now, what is it about that baseball when he throws it to Chuck that changes him? That's not clear, and it is definitely not clear how Jen changes. I think that the way that you described it as a virus, that's the best explanation. But Scheller, the writer, never makes it entirely clear how the other people get, so to speak, touched or infected.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense for the story as he's telling it so far, too, because, even though we as readers know, okay, there's some kind of, there was this, figure of light that's, never named that kind of starts all this or seems to start all this. We can kind of see that. We can see there's some visual cues that, he draws the person's eyes a little bit differently.
Yeah, they kind of
when they
sparkle.
They kind of start sparkle or glow or something, right? So we as readers are given cues on, okay, this person is one of these people who's doing good, but I don't think that's not something that's seen within the context of the story itself. As in, the other people don't recognize that; they just see a person's behavior change. And there's no other visual cue for, okay, there was a light being or whatever that transferred from people to people or whatever. So I think whatever this method of transference is, I think it makes sense to leave that somewhat ambiguous because the characters themselves don't know that that's really going on.
Okay. So you think that ambiguity functions well in terms of, I guess, on the narrative level?
Yeah.
That maybe later on, it kind of sets a mystery, and then later on in the story, as we get into things further, maybe there'll be some kind of revelation as to why or how these people are actually infected.
Yeah, and the one interesting thing too, I'll point out too, where is it? In the page, I think it's 6 of chapter 1, or no, page 1 of chapter 1. Which is page 6 of the overall story so far, because we have that 0 chapter or whatever. Mm-hmm. The title of that page, it's not on the page itself, but if you look in the code, the title of that page is Patient 0. So Keller is at least
actually
thinking about it.
It is on that page. It says Chapter 01, Patient 0.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, it's right at the top there. Yeah. So he's thinking about it in terms of in the same kind of medical type terms, and as a virus or as some kind of transmutable.
That's a good point.
Again, disease, if for lack of a better word.
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense to me now.
But I think even going back to dialogue, as I'm kind of scrolling through. I missed this earlier, but that it's got that one caption in it. It says they will come to call him Patient Zero, which suggests to me at least that they don't recognize this as a thing yet, but at some point later in the story they will. And they see this, okay, this is some kind of thing that's transferring from person to person to person to person. They eventually trace that back to Daniel here. And whether or not they treat that as a disease, whether it's actually a virus or, however this kind of seems to pass from individual to individual, I think that's part of the story is we'll get that later on at some point as the characters themselves start to recognize that this is a thing.
Yeah. Also, and I'm just noticing this now. I didn't read this originally when I went through this webcomic. But again, on that first page of the first chapter, in the reader comments section, Kevin Scheller, I'm assuming, writes in a comment, "Forget everything you learned in Chapter 0. That doesn't apply here yet." And then parenthetically, maybe ever. So, I mean, he is suggesting here something that I think that you have mentioned, that, there is this, to some degree, a disconnect between Chapter 0 and then the story proper, beginning with Chapter 1. That maybe Chapter 0 is kind of something like a flash forward, like an end result of what we see just beginning with Chapter 1. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing I think would be worth keeping tabs on as this story develops is the character Greg, the homeless guy. Because, Daniel does take him in. I mean, he cleans him up, gets him a haircut, shaves his beard off, buys him new clothes, kind of makes him a hip dude to some degree. Right. And then he lets him live in his house, much to Daniel's wife's chagrin. Greg, at times, not always, but at times, he seems to know. I just got the sense that he seemed to know something that everyone else didn't, but we don't know exactly what that is. I mean, at first I thought that maybe Greg had some kind of connection to that light entity that ended up touching Daniel and changing him, or that Greg was tapped into some kind of force like that light entity. But we don't know that yet. But there's something about Greg. He seems to have a sense of what's going on, but he's not revealing anything yet. Did you think that as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's another one that's going to be something that we get more revelations on that in subsequent chapters. I don't know how far down the road that is, but yeah, Greg's definitely I think a more significant character than he's trying to let on to be.
Right.
And whether that's a direct connection to this light being that started things or seemed to start things, or if he's just knowledgeable of it for some reason, or I don't know what else, some other. But yeah, there's some connection there. He's a bigger character than he's pretending to be at this point, or at least claiming to be.
Yeah. One other thing I want to discuss before we move on from Righteous is the platform that it's on. Smack Jeeves. Now, this is the first time I've read anything that's on Smack Jeeves. Have you any experience with Smack Jeeves?
Some, yeah. I've read some of the stuff on there before.
Okay, so what exactly is Smack Jeeves? Is it a platform specifically for webcomics, or is it for just hosting in general?
Yeah, no, it is. I don't know that I'd go so far as to call it a collective per se.
It says, I just clicked on the link to Smack Jeeves, and it took me to the main page, and it says Smack Jeeves webcomic hosting.
Webcomic hosting. Yeah, exactly. I don't know that I'd call it a collective per se, but they kind of work in that light, in that it's basically just hosting services for all of these different webcomics that are out there. And so you can go to the Smack Jeeves homepage, just smackjeeves.com, and you can find Righteous and all of these other comics that they host out there. I don't know. I honestly have not looked into the specifics of what the actual agreement is that they might have. As far as I know, it is a free hosting service, and the only thing is that you have to provide the links back to Smack Jeeves, and you don't have your own domain and stuff like that. So it basically does a little bit of self promotion within that.
Okay.
I believe it's not something I've looked into too carefully, though, quite frankly. So, but yeah, basically they're a hosting service for any number of webcomics. I don't know how many are out there. I know at least dozens, if not hundreds. But there's actually a lot out there, and you can check the homepage to see what's been updated most recently, what's getting the most traffic, what's the most popular right now, that type of thing. Yeah. And they've got a full range of stuff. As some of it's just simple, almost gag-a-day type strips. Some of them are fantasy settings. Some of them are more drama. Some are more action-oriented. It kind of runs the map.
Yeah. Now, did you read this webcomic on a desktop or on some kind of mobile device?
A little of both. I started it. I think I read like the first 2 or 3 chapters on a tablet, and then read the back half of it on a desktop.
Yeah. Now I noticed on my iPad when I started to read Righteous, it gives you kind of a guided view option.
Oh, I didn't get that.
I think so. I didn't use that, but I don't see this on the desktop. When I ask about Smack Jeeves, because as I was reading Righteous on my iPad, at times I got a little frustrated because it was taking a while for the page to load. At first I thought, well, maybe it's my internet connection, or maybe I'm too far from it. But I was getting a full connection, and nothing else that I do on the internet is slow. So I'm pretty sure I have a fairly fast connection, or at least satisfyingly adequate connection.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that maybe it was the Smack Jeeves that was causing the kind of slow load. And what would happen is I would get the image, but it would be a little blurry. So it would take a while to load to where it was clear and crisp, where I could read things.
Really?
Yeah, and maybe it was a function of my iPad. I don't know, but I'm wondering if you had the same experience of some of the pages taking a while to load.
No, it ran smoothly on both the tablet and my desktop, both when I was looking at it like I said, at different times. It's my offhand guess would be that it was an issue that Smack Jeeves was experiencing at the time you were looking at it. And maybe that could have just been a lot of traffic to their end at some point.
It could be, yeah.
But I've had no problems with it. This or any of their other comics that I've ever looked at. Everything seems to come up relatively quickly, and I'm like scanning through it now here, and everything's coming up pretty smoothly, pretty quickly, not running into any issues.
Okay. Well, maybe in the future, we'll have to look at another webcomic on Smack Jeeves.
Absolutely. There are plenty over there, let me tell you.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next webcomic that we're discussing this month, and that is Zen and the Ephemeral. This is written and drawn by Laurence Dionne, and you can find this at www.laurencedionne, and that's one word, LaurenceDionne.com. So it's the creator's name. This is a fairly recent webcomic. It started May 2nd of this year. It's currently being installments are being published. The last update was a couple of days ago, October 5th, and there are only 41 pages into the webcomic. They're still in chapter 1. So we don't have as much to talk about with Zen and the Ephemeral as we did with Righteous. But I think we can talk about the setup of this. Now, the premise of this seems to be our protagonist. And, okay, maybe I'm forgetting something. I don't think the protagonist's name is ever mentioned, although fairly early on in the webcomic, the protagonist is filling out something, and the name, you can see part of the name of whatever it is, I can't remember what it is, that the protagonist is filling out, and it's Laurence Dionne. Did you notice that?
No, well, I missed that. But what I did catch is actually if you look on the side of the page itself, not in the comic, there's a quick blurb on the side that says it's the story of Moe.
Oh, that's right. Okay, that's right.
Particular spiritual journey. Yeah.
Okay, I forgot about that. Yeah, it does say Moe. Okay. Duh. Because, I remember noticing that when I first started to read this webcomic and when I went back to reread it to prepare for the discussion today, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting name. But at one point, I did see something in the webcomic with the name Laurence Dionne.
Interesting.
And so maybe Moe received an email from someone called Laurence Dionne, because I think it was on a screen that I saw that name. I can't remember what page it was, but interesting. But okay, so yeah, this is the story of, I guess, a young woman, Moe, and she has a history with depression. And she feels the need to go to this, I guess it's a retreat. It's a place where people can go and for, at least for her, 10 days, be in a place with kind of a Spartan setting, where she kind of hands over or gives up all her connections to the outside world, like her cell phone, or any kind of computing device. She's not even supposed to write things in ways where she could communicate with others. In other words, there should be no distractions. And so she's going to this retreat, this center, in order to spend 10 days in meditation. And so that's the premise of Zen and the Ephemeral. And that's basically where we are. 41 pages into this webcomic, because there's not much that has happened. Moe tells the reader in so many ways, she has a history with depression, and in order to get over this, she thinks that meditation will do her good. We see her getting on the bus to go to this center. She goes there, she gets her room, and then the last several installments, she kind of wanders around the grounds and speculates on, how things are set up. The men seem to be separate from the women. And then there's a call for, I guess, an alarm or something, or a call for meditation. And she goes back to the center for her. And as we see with this latest installment, they, I guess, are meditating, because we see Om, that is woven throughout some of the panels. And so everybody's sitting around starting to meditate. And that's where we are. Yeah.
I think there's some subtle things though, that start to set up, that she's starting to set up here though, that I think will make for, and maybe I'm extrapolating a little too much or just kind of imagining how good this could be. But I think there's some setup pieces here that suggest that there's going to be a lot of interesting character dynamics. And I think there's going to be an interesting story message once this is complete. And I'll point out two things that catch my attention for that. First is in the very first, I don't know, 10 pages or so, before she goes to the retreat, there's a little bit of background about her and her history with depression, that kind of thing. And one of the interesting things that I think Dionne does here is that she presents a very physical manifestation of that depression. Right? It's actually there is a drawing of this is what Moe's depression looks like.
That
and it's
big
this,
black thing?
Yeah, there's like a big black scribbly ball of darkness kind of thing.
Right.
Which I think is it makes for a very interesting visual metaphor, and I think will I think she'll be able to use that maybe throughout the story to an interesting advantage, and kind of help showcase the mental state and the mental emotional state of Moe throughout the story. I think that's a very interesting thing going on. The other bit that I think is very subtle, but very but I think is going to almost acts as almost a little bit of a foreshadowing, is just before Moe enters into this meditation room with everybody else. There's a like a bookshelf set of cubby holes just outside the door, just outside the room. And as people are going in, they stop, they take off their shoes, put them in one of the cubby holes, and then take out from one of the cubby holes a mat to sit on. Mm-hmm. And what happens is, because Moe was out wandering around on the grounds, she comes back a little later than everybody else. All of the mats are gone.
Right.
Which I think, and I may be reading too much into this, but because she specifically says, oh, this is going to be uncomfortable because she doesn't have a mat, my thinking is she's going, the overall story message is that whatever spiritual journey that you yourself need to go on, that is not necessarily going to be dictated by somebody else, and that you're not necessarily following the same spiritual journey as anybody else. And I'm guessing that, and again, I could very well be reading way the hell too much into this, but my thinking is that Moe is going to come out of this this retreat with her spiritual, with whatever needs to happen, but it won't be because of the retreat. It will be despite it.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that in light of the fact that, she doesn't get the mat or the pillow or whatever it is that everyone else gets, and they've run out of by the time that she gets there. Yeah. But that does make sense. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. Oh, by the way, I did look, and that reference to Laurence Dionne is on page 7. And this is before Moe gets on the bus to go to the retreat. She's checking her email, and she gets a message, something about the meditation center. It's in that very last panel. And if you look on that, it says under, I guess, the subject heading reservation, there's the name Laurence D, and you don't see the Dionne. But so I guess that's just a little in-joke.
Yeah, it looks like it's just, hey, here's an email from the creator to the character.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a nice little touch, though.
Right. Yeah, I like the way that this story is beginning. Like I said, we're only 41 pages into the story, so there's really not that much to go with. Although, you seem to have made quite a bit out of the relatively little that we have so far. So I'm going to be curious to see how this pans out. Another thing I'm curious about is, this is right above that description that I should have remembered. This is the story of Moe, who is on a very particular spiritual journey. Right above that, Dionne writes, "This is the sequel to Nuances." Now, let me ask you: have you read Nuances?
I have not. No, this is my first encounter with this creator at all.
Okay, how did you find out about Zen and the Ephemeral, by the way? Because you're the one who recommended this.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where I heard this from. Honestly. I remember I heard about Righteous because I think it was about, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, something like that. They were running a Kickstarter, and I had stumbled across a Kickstarter for printing like the first issue or two or something like that. I honestly do not remember where this one came from. off the top of my head.
Okay, well, the reason I mentioned Nuances, it says that this is a sequel. So what I did was I said, okay, well, I'll read a bit of Nuances. And I clicked on Nuances, and you go to the first page, and it gives you several pages on one, web page. So you get, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which includes the cover, to Nuances. But then at the very bottom of the page, it says read more. So I thought I'd be taken to the next page where I could read, the next several pages. But what it does is it takes you to a page where you need to purchase the book.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess originally my assumption is that Nuances was a webcomic, and then after it had been out for a while, Dionne may have decided to make it profitable. So I think you can get both hard copy or digital, but both of which you have to pay for. So I didn't pay for it. So I thought, well, if it is a sequel to Nuances, I'll just take that on faith. I'm not going to pay for that. But I'm curious how this is a sequel. Because I don't know if Moe is a character in Nuances or if Nuances has something to do with depression. I don't know, but it'd be interesting. If any of our listeners have had the opportunity to read Laurence Dionne's Nuances and want to inform Sean and I on what this is all about and how this might be a sequel or, the first part of what we find in the sequel, Zen and the Ephemeral, get in touch with us.
Yeah. The other thing, one more thing I'd like to point out with this particular comic is it's actually done in French as well.
Yes, I'm glad you pointed that out. So I guess that Dionne is from Montreal. Mm-hmm. Because I think I saw somewhere on the website that that she lives or he lives in Montreal. So you can read this in both French and English.
Yeah, and that would be actually I am really thrilled that both of those options are available. Not that I can read French. I can't. I took Spanish in high school and I've forgotten most of that. But I really like just the notion that any comic out there can be read internationally. Mm-hmm. That somebody sitting in Paris can sit down and read this with no difficulty. And granted, that kind of you're only able to do that if you have, some kind of multilingual capability yourself, or you have translators come in, and obviously then it still requires the work of creating a second piece of art with the second language on there.
Right.
So it's not a simple, smooth Google Translate on this page kind of situation. But I like that it's out there. I like that it's made available to a wider audience than what we typically think of. Because I think, as native English speakers, we tend to focus in on that. And because of that, I think we miss out on there are other webcomics out there that are being done out of Canada, out of France, out of Spain, out of Chile, out of Japan, out of Korea, out of Russia. There's a lot of people putting out good work that we're just not available to read because it hasn't been translated. So I'm appreciative of that. That being said, though, I have noticed a few little inconsistencies in the navigation here because of that. I've run into a few instances here where I'm trying to navigate from page to page, or from jumping back to the start of the chapter or whatever, and I get taken to the French version instead of the English version that I was already reading. Right, so you're in
the English and you click, go to the first page and it takes you to the first page of the French version.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. And I think that's just a problem with the web page design and how they hyperlink. And so those are just a few little glitches here or there. Yeah.
But I pointed out just that it's, while I like the addition of the French language on there, and like I said, I really appreciate that's available. It just adds a level of complexity both to the creation process. Like I said, you got to get it translated, second piece of art, etc. But it also requires some additional work on the the navigation side, even after you've got everything translated, you've got to make sure that both sets of viewers, your French speakers and your English speakers, can read through the comic without tripping back and forth to the wrong version.
Right, exactly.
But honestly, that's a minor complaint, I think, relative to the everything else. But
yeah. Another thing, and we pointed out that I guess Dionne is based out of Montreal. If you go to the boutique, where you can buy, let's say, a copy of Nuances, as well as a variety of other things like prints, nuance buttons, and whatnot, some original art, everything's in Canadian dollars. So if you wanted to buy any of this stuff, the cost is in Canadian dollars. So I don't know. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to buy a copy of Nuances, and it is what? $10 Canadian. Oh, that's shipping. It's actually, it says $20 to $35 Canadian. That may be the difference between maybe the maybe digital and hard copy version. I don't know. But if I wanted to do that, how would I pay? Does it automatically convert U.S. dollars into Canadian dollars? I don't know.
Most of I haven't ordered specifically from here, but in a lot of cases I've ordered from other sites and creators out of Canada, out of Mexico, other countries. What typically happens is if you've got to put in a credit card anyway.
Yeah.
They just do whatever the conversion that you need. And then you get charged some kind of transaction fee or something. I don't, not a whole lot, a couple of bucks, maybe. But yeah, that you just throw your credit card in and it'll say, oh, okay, well, this is $20 Canadian. That turns into, as of today, that's, whatever, $15 American or whatever the exchange rate is at that time.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, interesting little side stories. I ordered some stuff out of England, some comics from England, right after or very soon after the Brexit vote about a year and a half ago.
Uh-huh.
And the exchange rate had dropped radically precisely because of the Brexit vote. And that was one of the reasons why I ordered stuff, because it was suddenly now $10 cheaper for me to order something from them. So, yay. I mean,
I guess that's one good thing to come out of the Brexit vote.
Yeah, it was good for me. Although I know I know I saw at least a couple of creators ended up stop selling stuff internationally because it was no longer profitable for them because of the exchange rate issues. Not just with the United States, but other countries as well. So that's definitely an issue that individual creators have run up against.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of the time, like I said, throw in your Visa, your MasterCard number, or whatever, and it'll do the conversion automatically.
Yeah. But getting back to this webcomic, Zen and the Ephemeral, again, you can find it at Dionne, that's one word, .com. And, check it out. It just started in early May, so you're getting in on the ground floor. We were only 41 pages as of this recording into this webcomic. And I'm going to be curious to see how this pans out and what happens with Moe.
Absolutely. Same here.
Okay, now we turn to the last webcomic that we're going to be looking at for this month, and this is an already completed webcomic by Tom Scioli, and I guess I'm pronouncing that name correctly, Scioli. It's American Barbarian, and you can find this webcomic as well as Scioli's other webcomic stories at www.ambarb.com. And American Barbarian ran from June 8th of 2010 to March 29th, 2012. It's a story in 10 chapters, and it is wild. As Johnny Carson used to say, weird, wild stuff. And that was my lousy Johnny Carson imitation.
That way actually was not too bad. That was not too bad, I got to say. Better than I could do, certainly.
Yeah. And not only this webcomic, because there are other comics on this website as well. There is Final Frontier, Satan's Soldier, Mystery Object. They have a look that is extremely reminiscent of Jack Kirby. And not just in terms of the drawings themselves, in terms of the facial features and the body structure, but also the kinetic energy, the action that takes place in this webcomic. And in fact, if you go to ambarb.com, you'll see the banner at the very top has the word Kirby there.
Yeah, that's actually in reference to his current webcomic, which is the latest one is called Kirby, is actually a biography of Jack Kirby.
Oh, really? I haven't looked at that one. So,
yeah, that just started, I think, just within the past month or so.
Okay. Now you are a Kirby aficionado. You know,
that is true.
I can appreciate Kirby, but I don't go out of my way to do so. He's kind of like there. I recognize him. I like his work. But, you know, you are much more of a fan, again, an aficionado of, and you write about Kirby quite a bit as well. So what are your thoughts on American Barbarian, or just the art of Scioli as a whole?
You know what? I've come to really like Scioli as an artist, as a creator. At first glance, you know, like you said, it looks very Kirby-ish off the top of your head. You know, you open up a page and it looks like somebody doing a Kirby riff, and you say, "Oh crap, another guy doing a Kirby riff."
Almost like a parody.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not. It almost looks like a pastiche of Kirby more than anything else. Just if you just kind of do a cursory glance at any of his work there. But at this point, because I've known of Scioli's work for at least a decade now, probably closer to almost 2 at this point. And he always, I mean, that's just his style. He has so embedded that aesthetic into his own illustration style that's just how he draws. Obviously a very heavy Kirby influence, but it's not one of irony. He takes not just the illustration style, but as much of the Kirby storytelling aesthetic as possible. So kind of like what you said is the illustration certainly looks very Kirby, but then so do the page layouts, so do the panel layouts, so does the overall storytelling, the pacing. He takes a very kind of Kirby-esque approach to storytelling in general. And while some of his stuff, like for example, the Final Frontier story that you mentioned, that almost comes across as a Kirby pastiche in that, you know, it looks like a Fantastic Four story circa 1965, only he just changed the characters just enough not to get in trouble with Marvel kind of thing. But that tends to be the outlier in terms of what he's doing in terms of storytelling. So like with American Barbarian, this does not look like really any character that Kirby himself did. I mean, it's a barbarian character. He's got the loincloth and the boots and kind of the long hair. So it looks kind of Conan-ish, Conan the Barbarian. Or if you start getting in more into the Kirby genre itself, maybe a Kamandi or a Thundar the Barbarian, that kind of thing. But it doesn't look like he's specifically riffing on any one of those, like a single character or anything like that.
Yeah. Now you're saying that Scioli is doing this and being non-ironic, which I agree, I guess. Although there are times in the American Barbarian story that things get so wild and so ridiculous that if not ironic, then Scioli's being tongue-in-cheek. I mean, he's basically taking what I think Kirby would have done and he's turning it up a notch. In other words, he turns it to 11 just to see how far he can go. Because I mean, there's some really ridiculous stuff going on in American Barbarian. So, for instance, we have in this story dinosaurs. They're real dinosaurs. And in fact, the real dinosaurs are kind of the good dinosaurs. But there's some bad dinosaurs, but they're robots, and they're called robosaurs. So, I mean, something like that, I think, is, Scaly having fun in what he's doing here. Also, in American Barbarian, there's a reference to a time where something happened, where the world that the American Barbarian and others they occupy, something happened a long time ago that kind of caused things to get really screwed up, and they call it the Great Clusterfuck. And again, I mean, it's just Scaly having fun. Another thing that's really funny is at one point in this story, and I don't want to go into too much detail here because it gets rather convoluted, but the American Barbarian is in this region, and I think it's called the Land of Mother Nefarious. And Mother Nefarious is the ruler of this land, and they're people who are a part of this realm, and they look funny. They look like carnivalesque characters. And the American Barbarian is playing a game, something like bingo or whatever, and he wins. And what he wins is an opportunity to see the god. And the god turns out to be this weird, floating, big, bulbous, strange creature thing. And the American Barbarian is consumed by this god, but then he comes back out, and what he has with him are these, they're called clackers, but he calls them God's balls. And basically it looks like balls. And again, I mean, this is Scioli having fun with his storytelling. I mean, it's not just an homage to Kirby, but at the same time, it's not a parody of Kirby. But what he's doing is he's ramping up the kind of things that Kirby would have done, but he's doing it in a more humorous way at times.
Yeah, you know what? I remember. Do you remember back in the 80s? Scott McCloud put out a one issue story called Destroy. Do you remember seeing that at all?
Is this on his website?
No, I don't think so.
So it's not a webcomic?
No. This was done as a published comic back in, like I said, it was the mid 80s.
Okay, no, I don't know. I don't know this.
Okay, so it was a single issue, and it's basically 32 pages of two superheroes beating the living crap out of each other for 30 pages. I mean, it was literally just a big slugfest. One guy, big muscles, just pounding on another, yelling destroy, and picking up buildings and cars and smashing them over people's head. And the superhero comes in and tries to fight him off. And the two of them just go at it for literally the entire issue. There's no plot. It's just two people beating the shit out of each other.
Okay.
And what McCloud said, I don't recall if it was actually said this at the time. I know I read it years later, but he basically said, that was me getting all of my Kirby out. Is basically, he said, every comic book artist, because Kirby was such a huge influence on comics in general, his thinking was that every artist is going into their story trying to outdo Kirby. And so he was trying to get that out of his system and out of the way, and it's a stupid thing. And this is just for the purposes of getting it out and getting it done, so he can focus on understanding comics, reinventing comics, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Although I think at the time he was working on Zot.
Okay.
But so he didn't have to put all that garbage into Zot. He did this Destroy comic.
I have to check that out.
Yeah, it's really interesting if you can find it. It's only one issue, and it's a quick read. There's almost no dialogue. It's just the villain just yells "destroy" over and over and over and over and over. Seriously, that's all it is. But Scioli is basically looking at that, and instead of trying to get that Kirby out and he's trying to do the same thing. He's trying to out Kirby.
Right. He's reveling
like
in
you're
it.
saying. Yeah, but that's just it. And it's not just, but he's embedded so much of that as his aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Whereas a lot of people look at Kirby and, maybe just get the kind of the basics of the stunted fingers and the heavy foreshortening and, a few elements like that. Scioli pulls in, I think, the full range of what Kirby was doing as a storyteller. And if you compare this work, American Barbarian in particular, reads to me like some of Kirby's later 70s stuff, like your Silver Star, 2001, that kind of thing, Machine Man, those kind of things, where he was just basically throwing whatever ideas came up at the wall and, hey, I'm just going to run with this, and this sounds like a good story at the moment as I'm drawing it. This sounds cool. I'm just going to keep going. And, Kirby as a storyteller he's a fantastic individual storyteller, but he had no plan when he was telling a story, right? He would start telling a story, and that might change halfway through because he had a better idea while he was working on it.
Well, that seems to be how American Barbarian progresses, because it kind of, I don't want to say meanders, but it kind of shifts. I mean,
right, and that's why I think Scioli is really trying to embody that whole aesthetic. Mm-hmm. He's taking that whole storytelling approach. Is this sounds like a good story, a good idea right here, right now, so I'm going to start drawing this. Mm-hmm. And then he gets 2 or 3 chapters into it and says, oh, wouldn't it be cool if this happened? Let me throw that in. And he will shift things around to suit this new story, the idea that he's got. And so it has this kind of crazed, wacky, just kind of bizarre in places story that's going on, but very much in that same vein that Jack Kirby used to do. You don't see it too much if you're just reading like Fantastic Four and the X-Men and that kind of things, because Stan Lee reined that in quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And tried to, he was very keen on doing that cohesive story. He recognized that a lot of their readers at the time were looking for that continuity. And, so he would talk to Joe Sennett and say, listen, Joe, I know Jack's doing this, but can you change the art? Because we said this in the last issue and Jack changed it and it's not working. And, that kind of thing. And that's, honestly, that's where I give, in terms of the Stan Lee Jack Kirby debate that is kind of perpetual, that's where I kind of fall on that, is that Stan Lee was not so much a great writer per se, but he recognized and was able to rein in Jack in such a way that it flowed better from an editorial perspective. And he kind of recognized that Stan, I think, was a much better editor than he was a writer.
Yeah.
But sorry, just to finish the thought though, and Scioli though is going on Jack Kirby when Jack Kirby was doing Full Tilt, which didn't happen very often, because he had. This is Destroyer Duck. This is, Commandi, without the editors. Yeah. This is Fourth World. This is all of that stuff going on Full Tilt.
Well, let's talk a bit about Scioli's American Barbarian, because we've been talking around it without really getting to the story proper.
That's true.
Yeah, this is, again, it's kind of a wild story. That goes on for 10 chapters, and it's about, the main character, American Barbarian, and I think he's the youngest son, Merrick, if I'm not mistaken. But it begins with an introduction where we have this family of a father and 7 sons. And in fact, in the very first page after the cover, the narrator, it seems, is the father, Yusaman. And Yusaman and his sons they provide the security of this kingdom in this kind of fantastical world, kind of a Conan the Barbarian type of world. And pretty soon into the story, the kingdom is threatened by the main villain, the big bad in this comic, who goes by the name of Two-Tank Omen. And again, this is where some of this humor comes through. And Two-Tank Omen, he looks like a pharaoh in terms of his headdress. On his feet, though, are tanks, and he has one on each foot.
Well, two tanks.
So Two-Tank Omen.
Two-Tank. Yeah.
And he has an army that backs him up. He has a couple of characters, Greylock and Sidge, that play more prominent roles, especially Greylock. And Greylock turns out to be someone that you don't expect. I'm not going to give away any spoilers here, but just know that Greylock is not who he appears to be. And you find this out later in the story. I can't remember which chapter, maybe 7 or 8. But they end up overrunning the kingdom, killing Yusaman, and it seems that he kills the sons, except for American Barbarian, or I guess the youngest, Merrick, because the other brothers are playing around with Merrick, and they put him down in this, I don't know, kind of well area and lock him in just to mess with him. And so he is not a part of the fighting, and so he survives. He comes out of the well or wherever he was stored or locked, and he finds that his family is dead. What he ends up doing is he carves on his fingers, the 10 fingers, the word revenge. Now, revenge, I think, only has like 7 letters, and so he has 3 more fingers to do something with. So on those, he writes exclamation marks.
What else would you put there, really?
Exactly. And so every now and again, he'll look at his hands to remind himself that, he needs to get revenge for his family. So what he does is he plays along with Two-Tank Omen, and he says he's going to work with him, right? So, he'll help him. He'll use his powers. He'll be a part of Two-Tank Omen's army. And he pulls this off for a while. Then he's discovered to be a traitor. And then he has various adventures. And this is where the story seems to go from kind of, attacks one way and then attacks another way. I don't want to say it's non-cohesive, because it is cohesive in a variety of different ways, but it takes turns that you really don't expect, right? So in other words, you don't have a clear, discernible narrative trajectory. It's one that's much more zigzag. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but there are a lot of wild things that go on. I mentioned the land of Mother Nefarious. That seems to be the weirdest section of this webcomic. What happens when he is in that realm? And then as we get toward the end of the story, there's time travel, which also helps to explain some of the things that happen when he's in the land of Mother Nefarious. Because there's something that happens. They see this strange creature of multicolors, and they call him, I think, the rainbow figure. And you don't even know what this figure is all about. But then when you get to the last chapter or two, then you realize that it has to do with time travel, and that it's actually the American Barbarian traveling back in time and encountering himself in a previous time in the story. So again, it gets really wild. Two-Tank Omen is wanting, his main goal is to get his hands on Yosaman's Star Sword, which is supposed to be this all-powerful weapon. But the American Barbarian is able, for the most part, to keep Two-Tank Omen from getting the Star Sword. So, that becomes, I guess, a motivation for what happens in this story. So, again, there's a lot of strange things that go on in American Barbarian. It's an interesting story, I can tell you that, and it's definitely action-packed. Again, getting back to Kirby, you have a lot of energy and, a lot of kinetic movement going on throughout. Oh, and one thing we didn't mention, that one of the things that distinguishes not only American Barbarian, but the rest of his family, is that their hair is red, white, and blue.
Of course it is.
Of course it is, right.
And see, that's one of the things that I think, not the hair color itself, but just that kind of idea that it's just going full tilt, right? He's throwing ideas out there. He came up with I think he came up with the design for American Barbarian as a character first, and then started throwing around ideas. Okay, well, he's got this family, and hey, they're all related, so wouldn't they have all the same hair too? And it's just one of those where he just kept throwing ideas piled on top of each other until you get all these weird things going on. That I don't know. I like it, but I'm, as you said, I'm more of a Kirby aficionado. It reminds me a lot of, kind of late period Kirby, Silver Star and some of those things in the, Fourth World era, or shortly thereafter. And it's got that energy. It's got that notion where, one of the things I liked about Kirby is he never had people just walking down the street talking. Right. It's just, even if there's some dialogue that needs to happen, even if there's some, what's the word I'm looking for?
Exposition.
Exposition. Thank you. Even if there's some exposition that needs to happen, that's going on while there's this other action stuff happening too. During some fight scene, or as they're running from one fight scene to the next thing, or while they're diffusing the bomb or whatever. I get that sense a lot out of American Barbarian too. Right? Is there's not a period of where you just sit down and have heads talking to one another to explain something or talk about characterization or whatever. It's just everything is, there's stuff going on full tilt. And the big difference between what Kirby did in Scioli is just some, contemporary social mores that they're adhering to, in that, Kirby didn't swear, and Kirby didn't hold up, the character's balls or anything like that. Right. And Scioli has no compunctions about that. Right. He's got, I'm on a page now, somewhere in the middle, book 5, and an American Barbarian looks down and says, "Oh my God, Robosaurs, I'm fucked." You would not find that dialogue in a Kirby comic book anywhere, right? But yeah, it's I don't know. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of dynamicism that runs through this book, through this story, this webcomic. And it's not, like I said, it looks like a Kirby pastiche off the top, but I think there's a lot of interesting things going on there besides just, trying to emulate some Kirby aesthetics.
Right.
And it's particularly, there's a couple of pages in here too with some really interesting panel layout or page layouts, where I was just looking at one where American Barbarian is running through the fortress and tackling villains on his way out, trying to escape. And it's one of those, it's almost like a Where's Waldo kind of page layout. Are
you talking about that page where they're in, I don't know, this large vehicle that's like a city unto itself? And yeah, because you can see him on the page in various places. It's like it is like, I hadn't thought of it, but it is kind of like a Where's Waldo. And you do see him battling individuals as he's like running through this vehicle, and it's like you have a cutaway, and we're seeing the inside of it. I really enjoyed that panel as well.
Yeah, and there's a few other things like that going on as well. Not every page certainly, but the fact that Scioli's paying attention to that kind of thing and doing that kind of thing, and not just doing a 6-panel grid every page kind of thing.
Right.
Whatever. He's doing things that are interesting that I don't, as far as I know, I don't recall having seen Kirby ever do something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, he did a lot of wacky, weird layouts, and he did cutaways from time to time. Here's what the Baxter Building looks like or whatever. But I don't recall him ever pulling that into as like a story element per se.
Yeah. But yeah, American Barbarian. I think it's a real fun story, and I think both of us would highly recommend that people check it out. Again, you can find this webcomic at ambarb.com, AMBARB, AmericanBarbarian.com. And then while you're at it, you can check out Scioli's other webcomics like Princess, Final Frontier, Satan's Soldier, and the really recent Kirby. I think we're only about 3 pages into Kirby. I checked that out. So yeah.
Yeah, he just started that.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, definitely something to check out. American Barbarian and other comics by Tom Scioli. So that's it. This month, Sean and I looked at Righteous by Kevin Scheller, Joseba Morales, and Gab Contreras. Then we looked at Zen and the Ephemeral by Laurence Dionne. And then we wrapped up with a discussion of Tom Scioli's American Barbarian.
All good stuff.
That's right.
Always enjoy the comics we read here.
That's right. Well, we always discuss good stuff, because if it's bad, we wouldn't be discussing it on the Webcomics episode.
Exactly.
Yes. And if you want to find great comics, both hard copy and digital, then you would do well to visit the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com, and there you're going to find a ton of comics at great discounts. But if you want digital comics, definitely visit their sister company, which is mydigitalcomics.com. So whether you go to dcbservice.com for hard copy comics or mydigitalcomics.com for digital, you can't go wrong with those guys. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up that phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And we've got email, of course, too. If you have some webcomics that you want to send us links for, or you'd like us to take a look at and possibly review on the show, you can send us an email at 2guys, that's TWOGUIS, at comicsalternative.com. Or you can send a note directly to me at Sean, SEAN, at comicsalternative.com.
Or me at Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over the social media sphere, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's the easiest one to remember, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And, Sean, it's good to get back into the swing of doing this webcomics episode. I have missed doing this with you the last couple of months, but now we're back in the saddle. And I look forward to talking about the November webcomics.
Yeah, I'm really eager and excited to get back and doing this. It's always a pleasure, always an enjoyable hour and a half or whatever it ends up being every time we get to every time we get to chat like this.
That's right. And again, to our listeners, we apologize for being away. Life kind of got in the way with me, but we're back, and we hope you will return and listen to us next month. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and we'll see you next month.
happened?